Okay, so hello everybody again. We're continuing our panel on therapist training and competencies. And we have one more video, one more presentation to show. It's by Sarah Tai. She's a PhD in working with compass pathways. She's a senior lecturer in clinical psychology at the University of Manchester and consultant clinical psychologist at Chiddle Royal Hospital at Greater Manchester West Mental Health NHS Foundation Trust. She currently works within a multidisciplinary team-led acute adult inpatient unit. Sarah is an experienced practitioner, trainer, and supervisor of transdiagnostic approaches for working with people with serious mental health problems and their families, providing one-to-one interventions, group interventions, and family work. She has extensive clinical and research experience of working within multicultural inner city areas and provides regular consultancy internationally on developing accessible community and inpatient services, training clinicians in psychological interventions for psychosis and bipolar disorder and mood swings. Okay, so let's see her presentation.
Hello, I'm Sarah Tai. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and senior lecturer in clinical psychology based at the University of Manchester in the UK. I'm really sorry I couldn't join you in person, but I hope by providing this recording I can at least contribute to your conference, and I hope you have a great time. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the training that's provided by Compass Pathways. My background as a researcher is I've spent many years researching the mechanisms of psychological therapy and also how to provide psychological support to people who are experiencing quite extreme mental distress. Now, it was with this background Compass Pathways approached me to be an advisor really for developing their approach to psilocybin therapy and also their training package. But the views that I express tonight will be my own. They won't necessarily represent Compass Pathways or the University of Manchester. Okay, so question one was, how long does the training take? Now, each individual will take a different length of time to complete the training program that Compass have put together. The people who provide training are a mix of professionals, mostly with a lot of experience of delivering psilocybin therapy. So there's a lot of expertise there, and it's designed to really help each individual therapist who's in training. So some people might need a little bit more support on some areas, and they'll be provided with that. So the amount of training time could vary, but there are 5 key stages that every individual will be going through. The first one is they engage in around 20 hours of online training. And this is just an introduction really to each stage of psilocybin therapy. There's a lot of reading material, there are videos, and a lot of role plays for them to get a really good idea of what's involved, and so that they are fully prepared for when they start to practice themselves. So part 2 is a 5-day in-person training course, and this is run by, again, people with a lot of experience of providing therapy, and the majority of it is short clinical scenarios, a lot of role plays. It's very experiential, and it's really designed to help people practice as much as possible each of the key stages of psilocybin therapy. That's preparation, the session itself, and then integration. The role plays are really designed to help people develop their confidence, but it's also an opportunity for trainers to observe the people who are training and provide them with key feedback. In-person training also provides a lot of time for peer support, discussion, and really helping people get to grips with some of their own issues and anxieties about what's going to be involved in providing psilocybin therapy. Stage 3 of the training involves actual clinical practice. So this is experience of sitting with somebody who's taken psilocybin. And the requirements are slightly different in the UK and the US. So in the UK and Europe, therapists are required to sit for 4 separate psilocybin sessions under the supervision, so with an experienced therapist. In the US, that requirement was for 6 sessions. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be with people who've taken psilocybin. It can also be MDMA, LSD, other psychedelic experiences. But all therapists must have that hands-on experience before they become a lead therapist for themselves. So those three core stages of training are what's required in order for somebody to become a lead therapist. But then there are two additional elements as well. The fourth is engaging in monthly mentoring, and that's mandatory for all therapists. So they will be mentored by somebody who is a much more experienced lead psilocybin therapist. And those sessions would usually involve discussing actual clinical material, but as well engaging in further role play and practice so that people are always honing their skills and developing their confidence. And then the fifth stage is ongoing, continued professional development. And again, this is a mandatory thing for all US and European therapists. One of the main things for Compass therapists is the monthly webinars that are provided. So every single therapist across all of the sites that are involved in Compass's phase 2 trial join together. Somebody usually does a case presentation, there's a lot of discussion, and that's a great place for ongoing learning. So the second question is, what background or what sort of qualifications do therapists need? Well, for Compass Pathways, all therapists in any of their clinical development program for treatment-resistant depression are required to be mental health care providers. So they have to have an unrestricted professional license that's in good standing. Now in the UK and Europe, they really must be registered with, for example, in the UK, the Healthcare Professions Council, and in the US, they also must have a master's level of education at least. So all therapists have to be experienced in providing psychotherapy and be able to demonstrate core competencies involved in providing psychotherapy. In addition to that, they need to be familiar with the principles of good clinical practice. And the third question is, should therapists actually have experience of taking psilocybin themselves? Well, again, this is my personal opinion here, but I would say the answer is absolutely not as an essential mandatory requirement. Now, the reason for this is the approach that has been used at Compass is all about really helping the participant themselves get themselves better. So this is an extremely client-centered approach. So as a therapist, it's all about being curious and not making assumptions that you understand what the person's going through. So we don't use the traditional sense of empathy, because empathy suggests that you can understand how somebody else feels. And in this approach, it's all about using curious and compassionate, sensitive questions to draw out the experience from the individual. So in this sense, you don't need to have had a personal experience as a therapist in order to be able to do that. In fact, there is a slight danger that having your own experience may mean that you make assumptions or you think that you can empathise with the person. That's not to say that having a personal experience won't be helpful. I'm just saying it's not mandatory. And the approach that Compass are currently taking is that they do not insist that all their therapists have had their own personal experience. I don't want to take up any more time. That was a brief response to your three questions, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are back. So let's begin kind of with question and answer. So one question that's come up has to do with what do you think are the recommended prerequisites for entering your trainings? So what type of graduate studies or non-academic therapy programs are best fitted for people who are wanting to train in psychedelic therapy, so the graduates of the programs can implement skillfully what they have learned in your programs?
Gee, I went through the whole list of the 15 to 18 types of professionals who could be in our program. I'll let someone else speak first. Otherwise, I'll just have to show that slide again, which I could, Ido, if you think that's valuable. But it'll take me a second to pull it up. Why don't Michael or Peter go first?
Well, I could say that this is an area that we're in the process of negotiating with FDA in the case of some of our studies. Um, so what we think is we have no argument with the idea that at least one of the people needs to be a licensed therapist. We're getting some pushback from FDA about not our main studies, but the studies allowing therapists to have their own experience, saying that maybe there needs to be an MD or PhD level person in every therapy team. And we think that makes no sense whatsoever. So we're actually now appealing to FDA about that. Again, in our phase 3 trials, we have master's level therapists that are doing very well. So this is kind of an idea that I would say came out of left field, and we're in the process of negotiating with FDA. But I think, personally, I think there's room for a much broader range of individuals, more like you're talking about, Janice.
Well, Ido, I could show what Michael's talking about here, that we have some similarity and overlap, and we as well support what Michael's saying about fighting the idea that it's only a MD or PhD who could be the first therapist. But just to answer this question real quickly, and then I'll...
Can I maybe kind of sharpen something about this before you answer, Janice?
Sure.
You know, I think a lot of the people are really, if you're looking at new students, they're just finishing their undergraduate degree and they're thinking, what is best for me to study, so that when I come into psychedelic training, then I know I come as best as possible. You know, I'm definitely thinking that a lot of the mainstream programs are psychodynamically trained training or CBT training. So I'm kind of beyond what the FDA asks. What do you think really will support these people kind of coming forward into this field?
I'll show my list and then I'll tell you what was behind it. That this is a list of folks we let in, and there are a few people that would not be accepted by Compass or Hefter researchers or MAPS researchers, but I'm betting that they will eventually be able to be at least the second person on a dyadic team, assuming that we will continue to have dyadic teams. And that could be an interesting discussion among the three of us. But if someone with a BA wanted to get involved in this particular work, I would recommend looking into any of these higher level advanced degrees. And there's a panoply of them here. And in other panels and discussions at this conference, you all have heard about going to get ceremonial training with indigenous peoples and in deep respect of their ways, if they're willing to share it with you, and integrating that with your more mainstream professional practice. To me, that's the best. The synergy of learning time-honored ways of doing this work, plus the ways we would do it at a community mental health clinic or an inpatient unit. But that would be my 2 cents. Hope that's sufficient for the cost for right now.
Can I add one thing, Ido? Because I get this question all the time from many young people in training, which is very exciting because we need all these young people to join us for sure. One thing I would add to what Janice is saying is that solid clinical experience is really helpful too. One thing we notice is sometimes if we have people who are very enthusiastic and oriented towards psychedelics, but don't have clinical experience, in a way, it's more difficult to help them get the hang of working with this than it is for people who have deep clinical experience and they have to learn to adjust what they do to work with the medicine. So I would say don't neglect good basic clinical experience. And we're deviating a lot from the normal way of doing things here, and there's something helpful about having a solid grounding in what you're deviating from. that can help too. So
Yeah, what I would like to add, or I mean to repeat what was said before also by others, is that there are different layers, I think, of answering these questions. I mean, when I'm asked what is the highest chance that I can ever work with psychedelic drugs, then I think to become a physician is the highest chance, because in Western medical system, there will be the physicians to be able to give the substances. However, there always is needed other therapists also doing the work, that their responsibility. I mean, here in Switzerland, when we have a application, we apply for compassionate use, this is always a medical doctor applying for it, but he can delegate his therapy to others. And I think other professional requirements are then not necessarily said that it must be psychotherapist or psychologist. For example, in our research project, we have a very experienced psychiatric nurse, and she perfectly knows well how to work with that. So I think on the professional educational level, it's not only us to select people. There are other circumstances who are creating the framework when people can work in that outside our training groups. And so we also accepted other people for the training than psychologists and medical doctors.
Thank you, Peter. Another question. What kind of training is provided to new psychedelic therapists to handle during the dosing session? How do you work with clients who become physically agitated, acting outward, or become paranoid towards the therapist's intentions?
What is the background of this question? I don't understand it really.
You don't understand? Well, I think that people are asking sort of what sort of how do you in training therapists, what sort of training, what is framework do you give the therapist to meet very difficult situations in which clients go into paranoia or very fearful? How do you train people to work with those states?
Mm-hmm. We are talking about emergency situations, and I think there is a whole range of emergency techniques. I mean, the first is to get in a talking dialogue with the people. I think it needs to get, I mean, the most important thing is to regain contact in any way, I would say then. And of course, you can only discuss that in a training situation. Then when you experience, you have to come back to what you have learned. And then the next step, when it doesn't help, I mean, you would have to give medication. And it was in this training, in this research project, now I learned, I was very hesitating to ever use neuroleptics or benzodiazepines in addition to in a session with the drugs, because I was afraid that we will stop the process in giving that. But I learned in a situation where it was really, really necessary to do so. That is what also a way to bring this person back to the process. So I think it is not for me, then I learned it's not the emergency situation that kills everything, the process and all. And I think, yes, it is one of the emergency measures we can take, but I mean, you have to go through that more structured in a way. That's only my short answer for this situation now. It's
okay. Janice or Michael, you'd like to add something?
Well, I just think it's less of a challenge, less likely to be a challenge with MDMA than LSD, I think. So we haven't faced this really, but I do think, I'm sure Peter and Janice would agree that preparation can go a long way toward making that an unlikely situation, really preparing people for what can happen and having good, solid agreements and forming a real working alliance. Obviously, I know for sure Peter does all those things very well and still can happen, but it can be less likely.
We teach aspects of what you've both said in our program, and we also emphasize the fact of following the lead of the research protocols and the very well described contraindications for even letting a particular person become a research participant, to be careful as things open up after rescheduling so that we don't assume everyone can handle these medications. What we don't have is a lot of data about being more liberal with the criteria by which we let someone have a medication. But with something like psilocybin, and MDMA, as long as cardiac issues are looked at and their stability psychologically is looked at. We do go over how to deal with adverse events, but we also talk about how not to become over anxious about something that looks like it might be an adverse event, but it isn't. So it's a delicate part of the training, and it was an astute question, even though it was a little bit off our topic. It's still within our topic here.
Okay. Okay, how do your models lead to the integration in healthcare, and how accessible do you envision the treatments to be?
That's a big question.
Which we are spending a lot of time thinking about and working proactively on.
Yeah. I was just on a call with someone yesterday about their willingness to consult with a group of us who are working on insurance coverage for these medicines. And I mentioned that there were several people in economics and healthcare who are looking at analytics of how much money could be saved over X number of decades from the treatment of someone who's currently on an SSRI by using, say, psilocybin or MDMA for their particular symptomology. So people are working on making a case for insurers to cover this. Unfortunately, right now in US dollars, to do it in the way in which we're doing it in expanded access, Michael can speak more to this, it's $12,000 to $15,000. So that's why I shared in my presentation, we're encouraging our graduates to be lobbyists when the time comes, and in readiness now, to speak to insurers and governmental agencies, both state and federal, to have people covered for these, even though by virtue of cost initially, it's quite expensive, but it's not as expensive as leaving someone to go through all the treatments available for depression then and ending up with ECT and that not working either. And the collateral cost to families and their work environment when these people don't get proper interventions. So it's a big part of the healthcare discussion in countries that don't have socialized medicine.
I would like to add, Janice, that that cost that you mentioned for expanded access includes a lot of that is indirect cost for MAPS, because that is still a protocol, and the internal cost to support. It's an amazing number of people at MAPS it takes to actually do what's needed to run these protocols. So that's part of the expense, but it still is a big challenge. And we're, as you know, we've added quite a few measures that are kind of proxies for future healthcare utilization to our phase 3 trial. So we're really actively gathering evidence to show insurance companies that this is going to actually save them money in the long run, even if the upfront cost is more. And we're also talking about, we're in the process of designing a group therapy study. So we're also looking at ways to do it that are more cost effective. And I think after clinical use, some people will need kind of the similar level of intense support that we're giving in the clinical trials, but many other people will be able to have more flexibility, shorter sessions, maybe group sessions. So I think there's a lot to be learned, but it is a big issue. And we're also working a lot on diversity and trying to get more diverse therapists and make sure there's access for people that otherwise couldn't afford it.
Thank you. There's another question that's being asked. Any advice on steps to take post-graduation from master's in clinical psychology? for someone who hasn't done clinical training? People who have already graduate training, what sort of specialities would you advise people follow through on?
Whatever you find most compelling to you to do.
If I understood the question properly, I would say it's important that people have a good basis on psychotherapy training in every kind of therapy I could imagine. And then when they are based in a method like you with Hakomi, for instance, they can then head over and in addition to that, broaden their knowledge about psychedelic therapy. And I think these two will be then a good background for entering the work, because the basic training is not provided by us, especially here in Switzerland. It's just an additional training.
Mm. Same with us. We can't do it all. So for my buck, I would recommend getting meditation instruction for yourself so that you know how to hold space quietly for someone else and for yourself, let alone, and that you can teach some of those techniques to your clients. I recommend a whole panoply of things, from holotropic breath work to learning about guided imagery to learning self-hypnosis or even hypnosis itself, although we don't use hypnosis with psychedelics typically, although who knows what iterations and interesting interventions we'll come up with. There's IFS, internal family systems, which Michael and Annie are great representatives of the beauty of that work with MDMA. All kinds of work therapeutically that could help you be with someone who is a bit altered, but that you're not particularly directing where they're going either, but that you would have a little bit of comfort after such a training of not knowing what's going to happen next. And as a therapist, we're trained to think that way, but often our cognitive functioning just, takes over, and we're starting to try and anticipate, we're diagnosing, we're looking at attachment theory of what's happening in the moment with someone. I would recommend any kind of modalities that take you away from that kind of training, that help you be with someone when they're in a bit of an altered mental state, and learn to ride those waves with that person comfortably. I'd also recommend you become a client in that kind of intervention, so you become comfortable on the other side of the coin.
Good. Huh?
Okay. So another question that's come up, an interesting question. Do you also think that in addition to scientifically trained psychologists and psychiatrists, people from the alternative work field can provide training, and possibly additional training? By this I mean, for example, facilitators who have been working with ayahuasca or truffles for years, are trained, for example, by curanderas or other traditions. Or for example, have been trained in regression therapy or hypnotherapy, things of the sorts.
Well, I think this is another thing we're spending quite a bit of time speaking about and thinking about, is we are very aware that, we're doing this through medical system and protocols approved by the regulators. And we also know that there are a lot of people that have a lot of experience in these areas, including indigenous cultures as well as other therapists. And it's a bit of a dilemma, but we're trying to brainstorm about that, because as Peter said, this is coming into the legal use now through the medical system, for better or for worse. That is what's happening, at least with MDMA and LSD. Maybe psilocybin will be a little different, but it's happening with psilocybin too, obviously. So I think it would be a shame if we couldn't figure out a way to draw on and include the knowledge of all the people who have experience in other ways. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to shake out.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about this too, and Michael, you and I have talked about it quite a bit with Annie. we're hoping in 2022 to have developed next year a training protocol for people who have a BA in mental health, which would be a bridge category for people who are very well placed right now and have been trained in traditional methods or have been trained in auxiliary methods, but they've had supervision. That kind of informal training and formal training, depending on the context, can be very helpful for people coming into the world here. And there's many of those folks. So the fact that the FDA has allowed in some of the recent protocols for the second facilitator therapist in the US to be a person with a baccalaureate degree in mental health, which the FDA is not defining for us. It's allowing us to define what we mean by mental health. So for me, that could mean social sciences. It could mean some pre-med training for a BA person, and obviously psychology. It might also mean some philosophy and religion people getting their BA. I'm not sure how constrictive to be about that, but that criteria would at least allow the people Michael was talking about who have a BA already in a general scope of mental health could get some auxiliary training. And so we're looking at a shorter basic program for those folks of making sure they all have basic counseling skills. They have an understanding of the scope of use of psychedelics over the millennia. We're not going to include much of the neuroscience and pharmacology that I talked about in my presentation, but we'll emphasize therapeutic capacity. And I'm hopeful that those people will be able to be certified and be part of community mental health clinics and retreat centers eventually.
Okay, thank you. Any other things that you kind of feel are pertinent for this discussions? You know, things that maybe we haven't thought about asking, challenges that you see, areas of interest, and something that you'd like kind of to offer to people who are coming into this work.
Well, this is a little bit tangentially related, but for those of people that already have training, one thing that's happening is we're getting a lot of requests for investigator-initiated studies of other indications, and people wanting to use MAPS MDMA, and MAPS is very enthusiastic about it when there's solid proposals. We've actually had, I think, close to 50 applications already. So people are coming up with lots of ideas about wanting to study other things. And we're very much in support of that. So just to let people know that's going on. And that's another way, that's one way that people are getting involved who already have training, but want to start to work with psychedelics. They can do that through a clinical trial as one avenue.
Okay, so being involved through clinical trials is a way to kind of get closer to the field. Okay, thank you.
Something interesting that just happened that may not be well known even in this country is the University of California at Berkeley received a 1.2 million grant. About a week and a half ago it was announced, and they plan on partnering with the Graduate Theological Union, which is Master of Divinity program primarily, to teach using psychedelics with people at end of life. And I saw in the chat there were a couple questions about that. So death doulas and people who are hospice workers, if you have a BA, don't know how they're going to be developing their training, but likely a training such as that will be right up your alley. And for those of you who may not want to exactly specialize in end-of-life training, you could still take such a training and then expand your repertoire of clinical acumen with other models that you could learn. And there will be, as Michael said earlier, many university programs cropping up beyond the one right now at CIIS And we're hoping to help many universities start their own program. We have 80 to 90 hours of recordings of our teachers that we're going to make available to universities at very low cost to get them jump started in their first year, and hopefully help their deans feel more comfortable about bringing in a psychedelic certificate, let alone a master's or PhD. So I think we'll be seeing many new universities and probably freestanding nonprofits offering training. There is a development in this country of a credentialing board that will be looking at both the BA level credentialing and the postgraduate credentialing. So I'm hopeful that a lot of people will be able to be at the table, and that this differentiation between the underground and above ground will start to recede. I'm an advocate of above ground because I'm coming from a clinical psychology point of view. I've been a professor for 30 years, and I believe in working for public safety and for the public good. And clinicians are always getting trained on how to put the client and patient safety first. And underground therapists don't get the kind of training that I would advocate for. So I'm hoping we can get everybody above ground.
Mm. So there's another question here by a psychotherapist, and he's asking, I'm excited to receive formal education training, and due to the investment involved, I have concerns. The certificate, as it appears, is there clarity at this moment as to what training certificates will be recognized? Can you speak to this?
Anybody's guess.
There isn't clarity.
Go ahead, Michael, you take that one.
The answer is no, there is not clarity. And I get how frustrating that is for people that are earnestly trying to figure out what to do. And we're earnestly saying, please come join the effort. And yet there's no clarity about what that actually looks like. And that's part of the nature of this work has been uncertainty from the very beginning. And we've, never known. We still don't know. We still don't know if we're going to get approval. We'll have the results of our first phase 3 study in about a month. I guess I feel your frustration, and don't give up, and it'll become more clear. That's all I can say, really. What do you can you add to that, Janice?
Well, and I'd love to hear from Peter too, but I'll add a little vignette to what you just said, that in our first year in 2016, we had 42 students, and 5 of them, medical doctors, a nurse, and psychologists, 5 of them did not want anyone beyond the training program and the staff of the training program to know they were in the training program. They didn't want their university or their hospital to know they were even taking the certificate. By the end of that year, only 2 of them still wanted to withhold their place, the obviousness of their place in the class. The other 3 went, what was I thinking? Oh, it was like coming out of the closet to be in this program. And then on the other hand, I had people who had retired. They were no longer a medical doctor or a psychologist, and they re-upped on their license in order to come back and do this work because they never thought they would be able to. So those people, all of them to a one, are waiting patiently to be given permission to do what they really want to do with this specialty. Some of them have taken up ketamine assisted therapy to go do something similar in the meanwhile, but most of them are doing a lot of this, just waiting to see how it will go. And I believe that the graduates of MAPS and CIS will be grandparented in large part to any credentialing board in this country. And I'm not uncomfortable with the idea of asking people to wait and keep doing their regular practice till this is available. They've had a wonderful, I've seen this in the MAPS people, that builds community of like-minded, philosophically minded people to find one another. Usually they're psychonauts, they have a mystical inclination, or they have a very empirical inclination of wanting to know what this darn thing consciousness is. And it's wonderful to meet people like that if you're in Iowa. Not to pick on Iowa, but or someplace where there aren't a lot of people who agree with your worldview. But Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that your structure is a few years ahead what we are doing. I think in Switzerland we are kind of in a pioneering phase where it is not a straight way we can direct at and say when you do that and that, then you will enter the system, because there is not a system at the moment. So we have exceptional possibilities. That's not only bad, it gives also the chance for people to enter the field or to do something else and to go back and forth. And I think in this pioneering phase, we should also take the chance of doing unconventional things, because it's possible. So not everything is regulated, and it is not a question of the right diploma to work in that. It's maybe more a question of initiative, of interest, of compassion to do that. And I think that's something that I like also.
Mm-hmm.
And with with MDMA, one of the peculiarities is there is a de facto situation in which if the phase 3 trials are successful, there's going to be a requirement by FDA almost certainly that people have training, and MAPS is going to be in charge of deciding if they have adequate training. That's going to be the situation at first in the US and probably in Europe, from everything we're gathering from the regulators. So there will be a period of time when, in order to buy MDMA, it'll be a government requirement that you have a training that has been approved by MAPS. Now, MAPS is not interested in being a gatekeeper in the long run. And, so there's a great interest in developing this independent credentialing board, but that's a ways down the road. So it is a fact now with MDMA that you would need to, in order to use it in your practice after approval, you would need to have one of these trainings approved by MAPS, which now includes Janice's training, our training, and we hope will include others too. We're eager to expedite anything that will help people get good training.
I would like to address a concern that came up now, if there is still time.
Yes.
I mean, we are really discussing our nice thoughts about training and build up good professionals and help them to develop. But can we convince the pharmaceutical companies who will have the registration of the medication that this is a psychotherapy, this is a psychotherapeutic work? What I see now, what happens with ketamine, at least in Switzerland, is that the treatment of ketamine is a purely medical affair. I mean, you administer the drug and you look that the blood pressure is okay and there is no emergency occurring, and that's the whole treatment. And can we be convincible enough to then talk to all these people and say, you have to incorporate this treatment into a psychotherapeutic work? That's not, for me, that's not sure at the moment that will happen. I mean, with MAPS, I think that's a different thing, because MAPS deeply arise from the therapeutic edge, but with the other substances, maybe it will develop a little bit different.
Yeah, because Matt, as you say, the FDA kind of was introduced to MDMA as a catalyst for psychotherapy. So they're going to require at least training in psychotherapy. But as you say, with the other drugs, there's no such history with ketamine, certainly. So I agree, it's a problem.
We have a few minutes left, and then another question is, considering the need for these breakthrough treatments, how does scalability relate to the quality of training?
That's a great question. Peter and I just traded WhatsApp phone numbers so we can compare notes on how to do it efficiently. Michael and I have talked about it with Annie, and where it's a big question. I have a suspicion, I'm just going to be totally projecting my thoughts into the future, that our 150-hour program will be seen as an advanced program of the future, that it won't efficiently train people. Our challenge will be to look at which kind of certification for which professionals is needed. For those who have come into the program I just shared with you about that we've developed, we probably don't need 150 hours of additional work for them to get up to speed. But then we'd need to do what MAPS is doing and look at fine-tuned competencies, how to measure those competencies so that every graduate who's done will have had an additional set of values and understandings and skills added in that they didn't already have. I'd hate to see a separate program for physicians, a separate one for psychiatrists, a separate one for clinical psychologists. I don't think we have the money or time for that. So that's why we've bundled ours as a postgraduate for MA and above people, and another program we're developing for BA level people. But I have a hunch we'll have to go down below 100 hours and do it online more to make it more viable for people. There was a woman in our earlier part of this discussion from Brazil who I thought, should she get a scholarship, she could fly up for the 2 in-person meetings in the United States, but then she could avail herself of on all the other online meetings that we have. And I know MAPS is talking about how much could be done online and how much has to be done hands-on so we can watch the people and supervise their clinical skill development. This is maybe the biggest challenge in the training field right now.
Yeah, and even as I'm in the thick of trying to figure out all this stuff about competencies and making it more efficient, I got to say it makes me very nervous to try to get too efficient at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And there is reason for there's reason for trying to be efficient because of the need, but I just want to be transparent about the fact that we're in the middle of this process, and I do have some misgivings about it. When we did the holotropic breathwork training, which has been such a helpful preparation for me and Annie and others, there was a requirement that Stan had. You couldn't do it in less than 2 years, even if you had the money and the time to fly around and do different parts of the training in different parts of the world to make it happen in less than 2 years. That was not allowed because he said it takes at least 2 years to integrate this shift in worldview that you're encountering as you do this deep work yourself and as you see what it's like to support people in this very client-centered, self-directed way. And if no matter how fast you get the content in, it can't soak in basically. So that's, to me, that's one of the big challenges, is how much can you be efficient without losing what it takes to spend hours seeing what it's like to be in these sessions.
Yeah. I haven't told you this, Michael, but 2 weeks ago, we went from 180 hours to 150. And the 30 hours we cut were videotapes that people would watch online that are more didactic and iterative of what they'd already learned. And I only felt comfortable cutting that. I couldn't bear to cut anymore. And we did that because of the pandemic. So I'm not sure how to make this work. I hear you about it, and I've been training clinicians in doctoral programs. It makes me nervous not to see and feel how they are in the room with a client. And we'll have to definitely have the kind of supervision you have in part C and E of the MAPS training, where we observe and supervise someone doing their first few clients.
Yeah, the supervision part, especially when you can do it with watching actual videos, that can certainly help with this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your structured answers on that. I honestly said I have no satisfying contribution to that, because I mean, my answer to that is in some way, what old people say. It took me so many years to learn that. And how can we give this expertise of many years to other people in a few hours, be it 100 or 150? And I'm looking for a way to give enough patience to these who learn that, to do the same process as I did, because I think it's really a long process. It's not the kind of learning in short time. You learn the basics in the time, but then it goes on and on. And this answer should not frustrate young colleagues. It should encourage them to be patient with themselves.
Okay. So thank you, Janice and Michael and Peter. I think we are at the end of our time, and we will also have a meetup room. So whoever wants to join the after discussion, you are welcome.
Thank you, Ido.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Ido.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Do we stay here for that, or do we go someplace else? Figuratively speaking.
In the chat, there's 2 links that were put in, 2 different ways to join the meetup.
I think we have to go there, yes.
So we added the links to the chat, but we also have sent the links to your emails. So they should directly bring you to the after talk rooms if you want and if you have time. It was really great to have you all here. So Ido, thank you very much for moderating. Thank you, Peter, Michael, and Janice for your insights and your wisdom. It is really, I think it's a really big topic and a big challenge, and there's I think a big road ahead of us. But it was really great to have you here and to have this conversation. And finishing here, this was the end of the second conference day. It was really great to have you all here. And tomorrow there will be a lot of other tracks and talks. We have a whole day focused on ayahuasca research. There will be indigenous people that will be speaking. There's a lot of interesting things still happening. And also before I end this stream, we would like to ask you to still have a look at the posters. We will send out a poll for you to select the best posters. The first and the second poster people will receive a prize. And also there are many different other polls to get to know you better, to know where you're coming from, to know your backgrounds. So please do go to WUFA and try to connect with other people. I think for me, it's very interesting to see that I was really, well, from moving from a physical conference to a virtual one, it was like, this is a big challenge, but I think it's still working out very well, actually. And it's really important, I think, in those times to have those conversations, despite the fact that we cannot travel. So I'm really happy that all of you are here, and for the more than 1,200 entities that are present at the conference. And I'm looking forward to see you all tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Erwin.
Thanks, Erwin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.